Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I'd just really like to welcome those who've been able to join me this afternoon. I'll just hang around for a little while. I'm not quite sure how many participants we're expecting. The invitations have gone out certainly to all those who are holding offers with us at the University of Portsmouth, and hopefully this will be of some help to you for if you're trying to make up your own mind as to where you'd like to go next academic year, or even in the future. But I'll just give a couple of moments now before I start giving any more details out, just to allow some people to join us. Unfortunately, the weather's, I wouldn't say unfortunate, actually I have said unfortunately, the weather is absolutely beautiful outside, so for anybody who has joined us, I really do appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to spend a little bit of your afternoon away from the sun and to learn something hopefully about pharmacology at the University of Portsmouth. So again, I'm just going to give a couple more moments before we move on. I can see now we have about 5-6 people viewing, so quick introduction. My name is Dr. James Brown, and I'm a principal lecturer at the University of Portsmouth. I've actually worked at the university for almost 20 years now, and I've occupied a number of different roles. One was being course leader for the pharmacology program for over 10 years, and also the division head of pharmacology for again over almost 10 years. So I have a significant amount of experience. I'm actually from Wales originally, and I'm from Cardiff. I actually studied pharmacology at Portsmouth before deciding eventually to move back. So I completed my degree and then studied for a PhD at Aston University, worked for a pharmaceutical company for a little while, and then went over to Canada to do a postdoctoral research fellowship before eventually coming back to Portsmouth. So it's given me a great opportunity to have a varied and I would say ultimately enjoyable career, but also given me the opportunity to travel as well. So I suppose why pharmacology? Well, for me, studying pharmacology was very much personally driven. I've been personally driven that obviously you can't tell, but I suffer from cerebral palsy. And as a child, I had lots of operations. And I was always quite keen to know why the anaesthetist was giving me a drug and why it was having that effect. So I asked around my careers advisors, and ultimately I highlighted pharmacology as being probably the ideal profession for me to go into. I'll talk a little bit more about career opportunities as we go through this this live video, but ultimately I then decided that before I graduated, my father sadly passed away from stomach cancer. So I had in my own mind 2 opportunities. I wanted to try and make a difference. I clearly couldn't save him, but there was another personal motivation there. So I went into the field of gastroenterology and have conducted research in that area for about 25 years now. So there was personal events in my life that kind of encouraged me to follow the path that I had. So what does the course at Portsmouth offer you? Well, it's a wonderful way of marrying up the disciplines of biology and chemistry. And if you have an interest in how the human body works, and certainly what happens when the body stops working, then pharmacology is an ideal opportunity for you. It also brings together some knowledge of chemistry. So most of the drugs that we take are indeed chemicals, and to understand what the chemical structure of those and how those interact with the body is a great way of marrying up those 2 disciplines. So if I just give you an overview of what the pharmacology course at Portsmouth actually looks like, in the first year you may well have studied A-level biology, but for those who are joining us from further afield, we'll certainly be able to talk about alternative qualifications a bit later on. But in the first year, we bring together we bring together biology and chemistry, but not plant physiology, human physiology. So we get you up to speed as to how the human body works under normal physiological conditions. Then we also bring together excuse me, 1 second. We also bring together and introduce you to formulation science. So how we package drugs so that they're in a formula that can be safely given to humans, sorry. And we also introduce you to pharmaceutical chemistry. A lot of the chemistry that you may have studied prior to coming to university would not necessarily have a pharmaceutical focus. So we look at large organic molecules and the structure of various proteins, including immunoglobulins, which are also becoming quite prevalent in our arsenal against and for treating disease. We also introduce you to health ethics and give you a really good overview, really good introduction to laboratory skills. So the focus of the program very much is on developing you as an individual, but to develop your laboratory and analytical skills as best we possibly can. And I suppose if we then consider what happens in year 2, we really do start covering a lot more pharmacology in year 2. We also have an introduction to pharmacology in year 1, so you will study pharmacology throughout the course, which is slightly different to the way in which pharmacology courses are delivered at other universities. And again, I can answer more specific questions relating to that maybe a little bit later on. So in the second year, we start looking at diseases and conditions and body systems and diseases that we can currently treat. And there's quite a broad spectrum of those. There's many diseases that we can't treat, and they form the focus of the final year of study. But in the second year, we look at diseases affecting the cardiovascular and respiratory and renal systems. We look at the gastrointestinal system and diseases which affect all of those organs. We also cover the central nervous system and the immune system. And of course, in the current climate, one of the reasons why we're not actually covering, when we're not being able to deliver this face to face, is very much as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And again, that's something that does form a focus of the second year of the program, how we treat bacterial and what is in our arsenal to try to prevent viral infections as well. So you may be asking, well, what's the difference between pharmacology and pharmacy? Well, pharmacology is really the research of how drugs work and the development of medications to treat new diseases and new conditions. Whereas pharmacy really is the safe supply of those medicines to the general public. I know a reasonable amount about pharmacy. I've been married to a pharmacist for almost 30 years now. And the main difference is that I have a better understanding of the research and development process of medications and how they can be safely developed for human use. And the pharmacist is really the expert on the high street or indeed in hospital pharmacy who supplies those medicines and looks at potential drug-drug interactions. So in a nutshell, that's kind of the difference between pharmacy and pharmacology. We have a number of options throughout the course. So in the second year, we also cover, we also give you the option to study enzymes and metabolism as an option for those of you who maybe have a slightly greater interest in biochemistry. There's also a module which looks at business for biosciences. So anybody with an entrepreneurial type interest, that may be suited for you. And of course, we also offer the opportunity for you to study a foreign language. Something I really wanted to come back to, though, is pharmacokinetics and data analysis. Again, that's something that we really do need you to have a good understanding of, so that you can appreciate how drugs firstly gain access to our body, and then what they do when they're inside. How do they interact with tissue, and what potential side effects may we see? Now, in between years 2 and 3, we do have the opportunity for you to take either a summer placement or indeed a sandwich year. What we can't do is guarantee you a place within a sandwich program, but that opportunity is available to you, and we will encourage you to apply certainly between years 2 and 3. In fact, you start applying very early on in year 2. but we provide an awful lot of support. On average, we see somewhere between 3 and 5 students deciding that they would like to take a sandwich placement. But for those who don't take a sandwich placement, we also have the opportunity to do some research in our own research laboratories, and also with some of our European partner institutions. Now, this has historically taken place through the Erasmus scheme, but we're also working very closely with our existing partners to make sure that continues post-Brexit. Again, it's that they're still in negotiation, and we still have links with those universities, and it's hopeful that we can maintain those in the foreseeable future. So you can then complete that research during the summer period as part of your final year research project. And something that we're very proud of at Portsmouth is we've managed to retain a large volume of practical work. We feel that pharmacology training is really vocational to an extent, because many of our graduates go on to work in research laboratories. So you need to be able to be confident and competent when you're working in those settings. So the final year, the focus of the final year is really on novel drug discovery. So we're looking at diseases and conditions that we can't currently treat. And this is possibly, for some, the most interesting and fascinating part of the program, because it's all good and well. We have a very large arsenal of medications that we can use to treat existing conditions. But there's also many diseases that we have very little capacity to treat, or indeed enhance or enhance people's lives as a result. So a good example would be something like Alzheimer's disease and other forms of dementia, where our treatment regimes are not very good at the moment, and there's lots of opportunities for us as pharmacologists to develop those in the future. The second point, I suppose, is in immunology, and again, this is a very good example during the COVID-19 pandemic, that our ability to treat viral infections isn't great. So there's lots of opportunities there for pharmacologists to intervene and to conduct research to try and help prevent these viruses from spreading in the future. And it may not be COVID-19; it could be something else in a not so distant future. The final year, the majority of it is taken up by your research project. But we also look at clinical pharmacology and what the drug development process actually looks like. Many of our graduates decide that, probably about half of our graduates decide that a career in research is not necessarily the way that they wish to progress, and they actually prefer more clinical-based science and a more clinical-based focus on what they want to do. So many of them go into either into clinical research or the support of clinical trials. And what we do is we provide, during the final year, a rather comprehensive module which looks at drug discovery and the drug development process. So by the time you leave us, you'll have a very good idea of what happens to a chemical and how it's converted into a drug, and then how it's tested to ensure that it's safe for human use. And that really, in a nutshell, summarizes what we do in pharmacology here at the University of Portsmouth. So I'm just going to bear with me whilst I quickly see what questions may have come in. Okay. So one of the points that I've been asked is, what are the labs? What are the labs like, and what will I use? Well, in pharmacology, we use a whole range of different instruments and conduct different range of experiments. They will range from biochemistry, cell histology. So you'll be working in a histology lab, you'll be working in a pharmacology lab. And in pharmacology, we rely upon, in some instances, organ bath preparations. So we'll be using live tissue and looking at the effects that various drugs have on the contractions within those tissues. We also do a lot of live cell work and patch clamping, so that we can measure changes in what we call the resting membrane potential, so how nerves become excited. We also have a number of different classes involving the use of ourselves as human subjects and human volunteers. So in some of the one of the sort of trinitrate classes, we look at the effects of drugs on heart rate, temperature, and blood pressure. So there's a whole variety of different techniques that you'll be exposed to. So at the end of your training as a pharmacologist, you will feel confident, hopefully, in the use of a broad range of scientific and analytical equipment. And that's really important because I guess the analogy I tend to use is that as a research scientist, or even as somebody who's involved in clinical trials, you need to understand lots of different aspects of the work and be able to understand how that information or data was obtained. So by understanding the analytical techniques, that puts you in a really good position for your future career. Okay. So I'm just seeing if there's any more questions that have come in since I've been talking. None that I can see at the moment. So I suppose I can now maybe mention about what many of our graduates end up doing. So, there's a very good point here. Can I study abroad on the course? And the simple answer is yes, you can. We do have links with a number of European and partners and universities across the globe, in fact. So there are opportunities for you to spend some time working in one of our partner institutions, and we do actively encourage that. We feel that science is a global industry, and there are global opportunities across within academia and even within the pharmaceutical industry. So I was just about to mention something else, which will come back to me in a moment, I'm sure. Oh yeah, so where do our graduates end up going to work? Well, it's probably fair to say that between a quarter and a half of our graduates decide that actually they really do enjoy scientific research, and therefore they decide quite often to either study for a higher degree, a master's degree, or in many instances, in many cases, they study for a higher degree called a PhD, which is a research degree. So I myself completed a PhD within gastroenterology. It took between 3 and 4 years to complete, and you essentially design you design a hypothesis and you test that hypothesis by conducting a series of experiments to either prove or disprove it. So it involves an awful lot of laboratory work and quite a lot of writing. It's not for everybody, and those who don't necessarily enjoy the laboratory aspects of that work quite often go into clinical trials. Now, I myself, after completing my PhD, also worked as a clinical research associate. So I was responsible for talking to, in fact, it was in the field of renal transplant and liver transplant. So we were looking at a new drug which had been formulated to prevent people from rejecting their solid organs that had been transplanted. It's a drug called cyclosporin, and the company Sandoz had just reformulated it, and I was involved in liaising with the clinicians, going out to check that they've completed the case report forms correctly. So I'd be cross-referencing that against the patient records, and making sure that the data was robust and reliable. I'd also be involved in liaising with the pharmacist to make sure they had enough supply of the medication for the patients, but also that their recording and reporting systems were accurate as well. I'd also liaise with the biochemistry labs so that we would use a single center for testing any blood samples or tissue samples that may come in, to make sure again that there is as small variability as possible within the data that we were obtaining, and then we'd have to write reports on that work to make sure that then they could be submitted to the regulatory authorities. So the regulatory authorities include the Food and Drug Administration in the United States, but also the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Agency here in Europe, in the UK, and the European Medicines Agency within Europe. And again, many of our pharmacology graduates would go into work in those areas as well in terms of drug safety. Because with the pharmacology degree, you'll understand how drugs work, but also what happens when they cause toxic effects. Okay, it's a very good point. How is the course assessed, and are there many tests? Well, the way in which the course is assessed is very broad. We have in-class tests, we have coursework, we have essays. So there's a whole range of different assessments, and that does kind of it stays pretty consistent throughout the entire 3 years. There's probably a slightly greater emphasis on coursework. Actually, no, it's probably equal throughout all 3 years. So hopefully that appeals to those who prefer to submit course. We have some modules which are exclusively assessed by coursework as well. But for many, we still have an end of module examination. The modules that we use at the University of Portsmouth, most of which are 20 credit modules. So for those not familiar with how a degree structure is, or how a degree is structured, I should say, we usually have 6 20 credit modules that you would study each academic year. The difference to that, or the exception to that, is in the final year, where the project module constitutes 40 credits instead. So then you have an additional 4 20 credit modules. But the assessments are broad. So for your project, it's primarily in the form of a short write-up. But also there's presentation skills that we try to develop. So some of the softer skills that you will require when you go into the workplace, which include things like having to give a presentation. Now, I must admit, when I was an undergraduate student, the prospect of sitting in front of a camera and talking to however many people are out there was quite terrifying. And then the thought of giving a lecture to 300 people, again, absolutely mortified me. But we give you the opportunity to give presentations throughout the entire 3 years of the program. You'll have the opportunity to give at least 4 presentations, firstly to small groups, then to a slightly larger group, but and then maybe up to half the year group. So we break you in gently. It's not just a simple matter of, right, here's 150 people, you're going to give a presentation to them, because the more you do it, the more confident you become, and the less stressful it will hopefully be. So I'm just trying to catch some breath. I'm just going to take a quick drink, if you don't mind. It's not vodka and orange. It's only orange squash. I just want to point out it's a bit early in the day for that. So another good question is, what is Portsmouth like as a place to study? Well, again, great question. I studied at Portsmouth many years ago. I'm from the outskirts of Cardiff, which was quite suburban back in those days. And coming to what was considered maybe a large city was a little bit daunting to start with. Portsmouth is a city centre campus. So for those of you who prefer a campus which is located maybe outside of the city, in its own setting, that Portsmouth may not be for you at that point. However, it's on the south coast of England. I think our VC encapsulated the description of Portsmouth really well. It's a hidden gem on the south coast of England. It's a wonderful place. The weather today is absolutely fantastic, and when we get the opportunity to go down to the beach, it's absolutely a superb place to study. We have great halls of residence, but as an organisation also, it's important that you get a feel for what the staff are like as well. And I appreciate how difficult it must be for you not being able to come and meet us face to face. But I think it's fair to say that everybody who's joined us at open days over the past, however long I can remember, have always felt have always said how welcoming the university and certainly the School of Pharmacy and Biomedical Sciences are. We really are, I suppose, one big family. We get on very well together. We work together as a team. And I think it's probably fair to say that our students really do appreciate that. We can't hold a graduation ceremony, at least in July this year. So to make sure that our students don't feel left out, I'm hosting a virtual pub quiz with them on Saturday. So hopefully we'll get as many as the final year students as possible, so that we can at least say hello and maybe hopefully not goodbye to them, to make them feel part of that community. But we do have all of our students' best interests at heart. We run a very comprehensive tutorial program. In the first year, you will meet your tutor on a weekly basis, and they will get to know you pretty well by the end of year one. That gives us the opportunity to understand, I suppose, you as an individual, but also makes writing a reference for you when you are about to leave the university, maybe at the end of year 3. It allows us to produce a much more meaningful and personal reference, I suppose, that we do generally know you. You're not just a number that we've seen pass through our organisation, and that's it. We generally care about your progress and your success. So that's a very good point. So somebody's asked, is there any reading list stroke prep I can do before I start? You should, if you haven't already done so, in the near future, receive a list of information regarding what's on our reading list and what the course actually looks like. So there's something that our course leader, Dr. David Late, has produced, which will direct you to sources of information and text that you may wish to read before joining us. And that would include, I suppose, human anatomy and physiology. There's lots of different textbooks out there. The one that we recommend is Tortora and Derrickson's Principles of Anatomy and Physiology. It's a really nicely written text with some wonderful pictures and images in there, which really does convey human physiology, but in addition to that, there's also a very nice biochemistry section in there as well, which will, for those of you whose chemistry knowledge is not their strongest aspect, will give you an introduction at least to some of the core principles of chemistry that would be of help to you before starting to study. Our core recommended text for pharmacology as a discipline is called Rang and Dale's Pharmacology. I would say if you haven't started studying the program, it's a little bit of a challenging read to start with, but the whole purpose of studying pharmacology as a subject is that you will be able to understand the content of that so much better by the time you leave at the end of year 3. So the lectures really go hand in hand with that core textbook. So that's kind of where I would probably start. And maybe if you haven't been in lessons or classes recently because of COVID, go back and recap on some human physiology, maybe some cellular biochemistry as well. So how carbohydrates and lipids may be metabolized, but also some of your organic chemistry. You might want to focus a little bit on that. So how we name organic molecules, what the different functional groups are within those organic molecules, because all of that will help you in a number of modules before you come and join us. But yeah, so thanks for that question. I believe there's a more formal document, I believe, that should be sent or made available to you shortly as well. Other things you may wish to read, maybe New Scientist, perhaps. It's quite a nice introduction. They have some very good topics in there, which are usually quite current and relevant. So I should imagine at the moment there'll be an awful lot in there relating to COVID-19. So just to develop a general interest in science and really what's happening within the field of drug development and pharmacology. Yeah, so there's another point as well. There is a virtual open day which is running in July. There's a link, I believe, to sign up for it. Dr. Late is involved in that. David is our course leader of pharmacology now, and he'll be giving you a virtual introduction to what pharmacology looks like and feels like here at the university. So another good point is there support on the course? Well, the simple answer to that is very much so. Probably a number of years back, we decided to implement a very broad tutorial system. So in the first year, the tutorial system is there to develop your softer skills, so your writing skills, your presentation skills, and also your understanding of ethical principles. But in the second year, we maintain that tutorial program so that we're starting to encourage you to look at developing your curriculum vitae, your CV, your resume, whatever you wish to call it. And we ask you to start thinking about applying for potential jobs after graduation. Now, I can only think back to my own time when I was in the second year that I probably at that point had no idea what I really wanted to do at the end of university. University was still 12, 18 months away. Why would I possibly be thinking about that? But you'd be amazed how quickly the 3 years will fly by. Within the matter of a blinking of an eye, you'll be walking in through the door, and very shortly, or it feels very shortly, not long after, you'll be leaving us. So between the second and third year, we really do want you to develop your curriculum vitae and your ability to write covering letters to apply for jobs after graduation. So in the final year, we also invite you to a mock interview, and the way that works is we ask you to identify a career that you may be interested in, and obviously there's no commitment involved at that point, but we ask you to we provide you with either a list of jobs and a description of what those jobs entail, and then we ask you to write to produce a CV, but also produce a covering letter, and then we interview for that post. And it's not just the academic staff that interview. We have a very good support service from our careers department, and Liz Holford, who is one of the members of that team. Liz joins us to act as a representative from HR. So she will ask you some of the more softer questions about, give examples of how this influenced that. So it kind of has a real feeling to it, and a real positive and realistic feeling to it. Many of our students are a little bit apprehensive to be interviewed for a job that maybe they just feel uncomfortable, but it's better to make the mistakes during the interview process with us than it is when you actually go for the job that you desperately want. There would be nothing worse than that. Another good point is what are the placements like? Well, the placements are quite varied. If they were in the pharmaceutical industry, usually you are paid by the company that's employing you. So you would you essentially remain registered as a student at Portsmouth, but with reduced fees. But also, the pharmaceutical company would tend to pay you during that 12-month period, and that can range from anywhere between, on average, about £14,000–15,000 per year. It may have gone up slightly more recently, but yeah. So you would be paid during that placement or that sandwich year. If, however, it was working, let's say, at the university in the summer, last year, for example, I took on 8 students who were between their second and third years. There was a series of projects that I wanted them to work on, and whilst we didn't pay them for that, they had the opportunity to come into the lab on a daily basis for between 6 and 8 weeks during the summer. And we kind of worked around them, so if they wanted to retain a part-time job, they could still work as well. It worked really well. In fact, the data which they produced, we took to the British Pharmacological Society meeting, which was held in Edinburgh this year, and 6 out of the 8 students actually came up to Edinburgh to help me present that poster. So it's a real benefit to them and gave them a real feeling of, I suppose, achievement as well as anything else, but also a value that the work that they were doing really was of good scientific quality, and it was a good experience for them to understand what a meeting of the Pharmacological Society actually looked and felt like. Okay, so I'm just seeing if there's any other questions. Okay. So in which case, I'd just like to say a great big thank you for those who've joined us today. And for those who were unable to join us, then obviously you might be able to view this on the YouTube channel. So without further ado, I would just like to close by saying stay safe and stay well during these challenging times. And for those of you who may have an offer with us, or who are thinking about attending one of the open days, I would encourage you to do so. And if you do have an offer with us, I really do hope and look forward to, that we can meet face to face when the term starts in October. So thank you all very much, and I think probably that's goodbye from me. Yeah, so if you do have any additional queries, please can I just encourage you to email SCI inquiries, so that's SCI dash inquiries at port.ac.uk, and we will get back to you really as quickly as we possibly can. Yeah, and they'll be able to help you out. If you have any visa questions, then they'll also pass those on to the global office. Again, if there's any inquiries about accommodation or information that you might need, then that's great as well. Anyway, I'll say again, stay well, stay safe, and hope to see some of you face to face in the not so near future. Thanks all for your time.